Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to be talking about a different process of character building. So in the last video with Antigone, I was discussing how you can use external images from real life people, to build a characterization based on a text. Now, the process I'm going to talk about now is something quite different. And it's a process that was based on my experiences of playing the monster in an adaptation of Frankenstein, which was done at Malthouse Theatre in 2014. This production was created by the Rabble, and you'll see that in the PowerPoint I'm just about to show, I've put a link to, or rather I've given the address of the Rabble's website. It's well worth your checking this out because they're a fascinating company and their aesthetic is really quite unique in Melbourne, if not in Australia. So I was cast as the monster. Now, in this production, because the Rabble's agenda is to analyze and explicate the world through a feminist lens, in this production, Frankenstein was a woman, and the monster, though not necessarily a woman, was certainly female. That shifted the focus of the production from Shelley's book, which was very much about man playing God and the ethical, religious, and moral dimensions of Frankenstein's relationship to his creature, to a study of a woman and her fertility and her control over her fertility. We still had the hubris of Frankenstein in creating the monster. We still had the journey of the monster from abandonment to revenge. And we still had the monster's desire for a partner and for something which would make its life full. But the gender politics of this production, just as we saw in Antigone, shifted things. So, for instance, in the book, Frankenstein's monster forces Frankenstein to create him a female mate. In the Rabble's adaptation, Frankenstein's monster forces her to give Frankenstein a baby which Frankenstein then kills. So very much a focus on the female and on reproduction. Now, I should say in this video, there are going to be a few little snippets that some might find disturbing. If that's the case, stop now. I'll give you a heads up. It's a calf being born, and it's me, well, to be brutally honest, naked with 26 prosthetic bosoms attached to me. So if you can't handle that, it's fine. Just stop the video now. Okay, so I'm going to go on to the share the PowerPoint that I've done, just to give you an idea of some of the visual imagery that one can use in an event, a production like this. Okay, just let me play from the start. So there we go. There you'll see the Rabble's website if you want to have a look at it further. So I came to the production not knowing much about how to play a monster or even about what the production would be like. The Rabble works through improvisation and devising. So what they'll do, what the director, Emma Valente, will do, is throw in a provocation, maybe a scene, maybe given circumstances, or maybe just a riddle, which the performers improvise around. There's also a props table, a large props table with a completely eclectic array of props from which the actors can create things. We went through in the early initial stages of devising lots of different ideas for the monster. We thought about what is monstrous in our society, the taboos around our society, the taboos around an aging naked body, things like that. At the same time that Kate and Emma were working on the design concept and the ultimate aesthetic of the production, I was having to think about what to me is both monstrous and maternal and ultimately fecund. Fecund means fertile. I had to think about some of the old fertility symbols. And I also thought about this image, Frida Kahlo's broken column. I thought about what this actually means and does. The nails which have an intertextual reference to Christ on the cross, this very strange strapping and what that does, the prominence of the bosom, but at the same time the sense of constriction, and the brutality of that column down the center. Also her face, also her eyes, also the monobrow, the famous Frida Kahlo monobrow. Coincidentally, Kate Davis, the designer, had been looking at exactly the same image. And bit by bit, in the initial stages of rehearsals, we discovered that we had exactly the same storybook, if you like, of inspirational images. The next one that came to my head was this, Patricia Piccinini. Now, she's a wonderful artist, and she creates They're horrific, but they're also deeply beautiful and deeply moving images of the monstrous. I love this because of the ugliness, but yet the extreme beauty and the gentleness of this aberrant mother figure. The teats there, the aging hands, but at the same time, the shimmer on the skin, the softness of it, the sense of maternal love in something which is frankly monstrous. That led me on to another artist, Louise Bourgeois. Now, Louise Bourgeois is an absolutely fascinating artist, and if you don't know her work, do check it out. She's extraordinarily visceral in her exploration of a female aesthetic of the female body. I was particularly drawn to this very strange latex suit with all of these protuberances of bosoms, and this, a similar idea. So Kate Davis and Emma Valente and I started to come up with the idea of the monster who would be naked, but would also have these strange bosoms attached with this Frida Kahlo-like constriction around her. So I want you to keep that in mind as we very shortly get to a video of the production, that the way that the monster was created visually was absolutely a collaboration between me, the actor, and the director and the designer, brainstorming images, brainstorming ideas. Remember, when I came into rehearsals, none of us had a clue what the monster would look like. It was through looking at images, through getting excited about the possibilities that other art forms can provide to us, that we came up with the final design for the monster. Let's think then about the opening of the play for the monster, and this is the same in the book as well. Frankenstein creates the monster is born, becomes alive, and Frankenstein in horror abandons the monster. The monster is at this stage like a baby, helpless, desperate, totally confused, unable to understand the environment into which he or she has been born, desperately craving for love. And you could say that both the book and this adaptation, they're primarily about the monster's search for the father/mother figure and for love, for understanding. And indeed, you could say that if Frankenstein had only given the monster love and nurture, none of the tragedy that unfolds through the course of the book would actually have happened. So, Frankenstein gives birth to the monster. The monster is a baby, is born in the amniotic fluid of the artificial womb that the Frankenstein, the mother, has created. Again, we needed a visual image for that. We needed something that could be inspirational. So I started thinking about all the times that I'd seen videos, or in one or two cases, live births of animals. This is the little trigger warning here. I'm now about to show you a little video of the birth of a fawn. So I found this type of, again, viscerality and beauty really interesting as a performer. The baby is born through the amniotic fluid, the amniotic sac. We see the viscerality of the image, but at the same time, the care of the mother deer. But what happens if that care is not given? Instead, we just have the visceral mucous membrane of birth, the inability to stand or to move or to cope with the fluid in the lungs of the newborn, and the desperate search for the mother's attention. In the end of the first scene, after Frankenstein has given birth to the monster is desperately looking for love and attention from the mother figure, and the mother abandons her creation. So at this stage, I'm a mother. At the stage, my children were, 6 years ago, so 11 and 8. But I still remembered very vividly the way that babies cry. and the way that babies learn to walk, and basically the strangeness of a baby. A baby is an uncanny thing, beautiful, cute, we love them to bits, but they're not yet really human because they haven't taken on the attributes that we as adults believe make us human. There's something to be petted, something to be looked after, something which is incapable of surviving by itself. So a few things that I thought about. Now, I was actually using my own memory as a mother for this, but you can see in any videos that the same tropes, the same mannerisms that I was trying to emulate as an actor, basically they're universal. So I want us to have a little look at this video, no more of the fawn. Let's have a look at this one. All right.
Oh, hey.
So in all of these, what we see is the center of gravity. And as an acting exercise, I would strongly recommend that you have a look at this video again and you imitate the way that the baby has a shifting center of gravity. It's actually the most miraculous thing. Their center of gravity is entirely in their core. And you can see that by the way they sit down. When they plonk down, their back is straight. If we plonk down, if we fall over, say, you're ice skating and you fall on your bum, your whole back and your whole body arches over. But a baby doesn't do that. A baby keeps a straight back. And the toddling that we see is all about balance. So that was another thing that's important to think about in this opening scene. So we have a scene where a baby, a fully grown, monstrous, middle-aged baby, complete with the prosthetic bosoms that come from Louise Bourgeois, the aging skin that comes from Patricia Puccinini, and the prosthetic bosoms, and the sort of white binding that comes from Frida Kahlo. She slips through the amniotic fluid, remembering the fawn being born, and tries to walk, immediately tries to walk. In this little video, we've had, 8 months of development in the baby, but with Frankenstein's monster, she's pretty darn quick. She picks it up within about a minute, going from zero, from a newborn, up to, what should we say, a 12-month-year-old toddler, all in the space of a minute or two. She comes to her mother, center of gravity changes, she's now crawling. She comes to her mother wanting for milk. The mother refuses, the mother abandons her, the mother walks out of the door, leaving her alone. And that's when we have the sense of abandonment that is absolutely heartbreaking. So I want us to think now about this video. Not that one, but this one. It's almost too much, isn't it? And what's interesting about that from an oral point of view is the way the crying changes, the pitch changes. And instead of having the irregular, we get the, it stays on the one sound, the one constant sound, and it's almost unbearable to hear. So this was also coming together with the idea of a baby. We have the image of the baby, the way that she looks. We have the movement, which comes from slipping through the amniotic fluid and going from 0 to 12 months in the space of a minute in terms of walking. We have the cry of abandonment. And there's another thing that popped into my head, which was this. Because there's actually nothing that says more abandonment and also a kind of abject desire for attention, for love, and for approbation than a puppy crying. I've got one outside right now in the back porch. I mean, she's 3 years old, so she's hardly a puppy anymore, but she is just devastated that I've put her outside while I'm doing this little video. A dog crying for attention is something which is on a par probably with a baby in terms of how distressing it can be for an audience, but also what it says about the desperate need of that creature. Okay, so we thought about now visual imagery, about memories from my personal life as a mother, about other external sources that have come into play. I'm now just going to show you a little snippet for a couple of minutes or so of the actual production to see how I tried to integrate them. I wasn't always successful, right? It's very important that you know that I'm not showing you these videos to say, blow my own trumpet. It's not that, but it's knowing that an actor can go through the processes for one play of looking at Julia Gillard or Hillary Clinton or Julie Bishop, but for another play, looking at puppy dogs and screaming babies, well, that's why I'm doing these videos. That's why it's important. Okay, so here's the snippet from the actual production itself. Now, I should give you the warning that crying like that can completely bugger up your vocal cords unless you know where to do it from. You're basically doing it from your diaphragm and from your lower ribs, definitely not from your throat. But that's also the way that babies cry. Babies haven't learned to constrict their voice yet. And so they can cry for an eternity, as any mother of a newborn will tell you, or father, without hurting their voices. And so if you want to do something like that, if you want to be able to pull off a cry that lasts for that length of time, and actually the director initially had it lasting even longer, but thankfully she allowed me to stop sooner rather than later. If you're going to do that, you've got to be able to find that place in your body which is the same place as the baby's. So that cry was a very conscious attempt on my part to bring together both the cry of the baby and the whimper of the puppy dog. Now, the puppy dog was also an interesting thing in terms of the next little scene that I want to show you. And I'm only showing it to you for two things. First is about how you can use animals. And the second is about a very specific moment that I remember from my kids, well, actually from my elder daughter. And I found a video to kind of show what I'm talking about. So in a lot of drama schools, and in fact a lot of drama training, you are asked to impersonate an animal. It's a bit like that game, if you were an animal, what would you be? My kids anyway tell me that I would be a red setter or a golden retriever. I'm not sure myself. I don't know whether that's actually flattering or not. I certainly wouldn't be like the big Airedale I have out the back of in our garden right now. So when I was a young actor and I first was asked to pretend to be a dog or pretend to be a penguin or whatever it was, I found it an impossible exercise and a really embarrassing exercise, because I thought, I now understand erroneously, that it was about impersonating the way a penguin walks or the way a dog walks or the way a cat slinks around or falls asleep or paws your legs or sits on your computer. It's not about that at all. It's not about that even remotely. What it's about is using your imagination to get into the essence of a cat or the essence of a penguin. So for a moment, just as a little exercise, you might want to close your eyes and think about, if you've got a cat, perfect example, but any animal you can think of. And for a moment, let your imagination take you to get inside that animal, to the essence of that animal. So as I'm talking to you right now, I'm trying to get into the essence of my black cat, which is currently lying over there on my bed. Now, my black cat's really rather nice. He's quite mushy sometimes, but he's also a natural born killer. And he really, really likes killing sugar gliders and phascogoles. And so there's something behind his eyes which is actually a little bit sadistic, maybe? Just a little bit, but not really, not truly. Now, what I've just done there, and you might not have seen any difference at all, you probably didn't, but what I've just done there for me as an actor is find a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit of essence of cat, which I can then apply to a character. So going back to instance 4 to the Antigone video, what would be the animal of the leader? Well, I think possibly a horse, but maybe that's too stupid. Or maybe some sort of bird. Maybe an eagle, but that's too obvious. Maybe certainly not a cat. Maybe a big cat, maybe a panther, I don't know yet, maybe a fox. All these possibilities are things that you as an actor can try out. It's not easy, it doesn't jump off the page to say, this character is a panda. You actually have to work through a few options before you get to the right character, the right animal to be your character. But once you do find an animal, or even if you find multiple animals, and you can get inside their heads and bring their heads into you, and through nothing but imagination start to feel that tiny bit of an essence, once you can do that, you have another thing that you can add to the palette with which you are painting your character. So it's worth thinking about. And it's worth looking back over those puppies and trying to get inside their heads and to get them inside your head and how it makes you feel. Doing something like this part of Frankenstein's monster is distressing. It can be emotionally draining. And we were performing it in late autumn when it was very, very cold. And as you see, there were 500 water balloons and I was naked and very wet and I did become very physically ill. It also had a psychological effect on me. So one thing to say is whenever you are tackling something which is difficult and dark like this, you've got to be very careful of yourself. Self-care is incredibly important. So the 2 last things I want to talk about are this. There is a moment in the play, in the next scene that I'm about to show, where the monster sees for the first time her reflection. This is a very poignant moment in the novel. And in our production, because there was a big water pool, she sees her reflection in the water. So we also have an intertextuality with the myth of Narcissus. And she touches her reflection and the light reflects up into a prism of color on the wall, which she sees. So 2 things then about this scene. The opening of the scene is the puppy dog waiting. The puppy has now cried itself to a state of exhaustion, but is still just waiting and waiting and waiting. And the toddler baby is still sitting completely with a straight back, with that core engaged and that incredibly stable sense of balance, even though they're going to fall away. From that, we move into the toddler. And I want to show you this little piece. Now, next, not that, we've had enough of that. Forgive the choir music. Okay, so what was interesting about that for me is it reminded me of something that Eliza, my daughter, did, which was she would look for approval. She would look for somebody to share in this amazing discovery with her. So she looks in the mirror at herself and it's just amazing. Come on, have a look too. But as you could see from that little toddler, that little baby, there was a sense of confusion because the person that she was looking towards, probably one of her parents, was quite likely holding a phone and videoing her rather than engaging with her. And so there was that look, that slight look of consternation going on. Moving on to the next video. So here we see my trying to incorporate all of those elements, the faithful puppy waiting for approbation from the owner, and the toddler trying to get that attention to look at this amazing thing, which is the reflection. We've also now got the baby who was turned into a toddler. So in the space of whatever it is between scenes, the baby is now able to walk with a slightly different center of gravity, but we've still got there the straight back and the center of gravity in the abdomen. And then the final thing that I'm trying to show in this bit is what you can notice in babies and toddlers, how curiosity can very quickly turn to frustration. And that frustration can then turn to what an adult might call to be, might deem a sort of resignation of despair even. So the monster is pulling up her amniotic fluid bag. And now, just like the dog who's whining to come in, or just like the baby who realizes that nobody is going to answer her cries, she just gives up. She gives up and she actually eats her amniotic sac, just to give you a heads up of what happens in the production. Okay, so what I've been trying to do with this then is to just give you tips how, as an actor, it's not just basing your characterization on real people, but on other quite extraneous inspirations that you can find. Think about animals. Think about how they behave and how that can help you. Become eclectic in what you look at in terms of images, in terms of art. Every actor should go to every art gallery they just happen to be passing. Not because they need to be necessarily culture vultures, but because they might see something that they store in their memory and they're able to draw on later. You find yourself waiting somewhere in a waiting room with a coffee table. Don't look at Who magazine, look at the art books that are there. Similarly with music, it's great for you to have an eclectic range of music. So if you only know one type of music, if you only know, say, pop music or R&B or hip hop or whatever it might be, try listening to Classic FM. You might be really surprised what you hear. Music can be an incredibly important part of creating your characterization. And indeed, pretty much every part I play has a musical soundtrack in my head. For Frankenstein, it was a piece by Luke Howard, who's a Melbourne minimalist composer. For the leader, Creon, it was Max Richter's reworking of the Four Seasons. For the part I've just done, it was a piece by John Tavener. It's actually got nothing to do with the play or the production. That music isn't going to be used in the production, but it's something that can help you get into an atmospheric mood for the part. And obviously that's very much like what you've been doing with Laura in your warm-ups. Okay, so 2 very different approaches, 2 very different shows, 2 very different characterizations, the same actor. So I hope that this has been helpful in just giving you a few tips. Obviously, when we come to Shakespeare, again, it is different, because the thing about Shakespeare is you don't actually act Shakespeare. You say Shakespeare, and the language does the acting for you. But that doesn't mean to say that you still can't create a fully rounded characterization through some of the ways that I've been showing you. Okay, well, I will catch you in class, and I hope you're well and you have a great week. So I'll see you next week. Bye.